Welcome to Unit 3, Lesson 2. Next step with perfect competition is to look at the firm's decision to produce, whether to produce or not, if it's making a loss in the short run, and also how the perfectly competitive analysis that we've done so far relates to how we build a supply curve for a perfectly competitive industry. Everything that we've been doing so far is basically the underpinnings of the classic supply curve, upward sloping supply curve that we've seen. So we're going to see how that gets put together in this lesson. Okay, first what we call the firm's shutdown decision. This seems at first a little bit counterintuitive, but the perfectly competitive firm, in the short run, might continue to produce even if it's losing money, depending on how much it's losing. Now in the long run, it won't. It'll get out of the industry and do something else. But in the short run, because there are fixed costs to cover no matter whether they produce anything or not, sometimes the firm's better producing some units and losing some money on that as opposed to just shutting down and losing their entire fixed cost. So let's look at the analysis of how this happens. Here's the next slide on your handout. It's called the Perfectly Competitive Firm's Shutdown Decision and the Supply Curve. We're going to deal with both of these on the same slide. So the rule here to remember, first off, is that first bullet point. In the short run, the firm will continue to produce as long as the price is greater than the minimum average variable cost of the firm. Let me go back down here. I've got two slides that we worked with in the last unit. Here's this firm's list of average variable costs and average total cost, and we can find the shutdown point from this column here by just identifying what's the lowest number on this average variable cost column. And here it's $10. So we'd say the shutdown point for this firm is $10. In other words, if the price is above $10, they will continue to produce, even if they're losing money. If the price is below $10, they will shut down immediately. If the price is equal to $10, we would say they're indifferent between shutting down or continuing to produce. On this graph, we see that $10 listed as the shutdown price there, corresponds with point A at a quantity of 3. And let's go back to what we did yesterday to try to help explain why the firm would choose to do this. So in the previous lesson, when we looked at this firm's revenues and costs at different prices, and we took a situation if the price were $10, remember that's the shutdown point, turns out. And we said if the market price is $10, the firm's going to produce 3 units. And that the best situation is for them to produce 3 units and to lose $14. Okay, that doesn't sound good. So why would the firm continue to produce if they're losing $14? Well, the reason comes from their fixed costs. We can identify their fixed costs from this column here, even if it doesn't give it to you specifically. You can get that from the total cost of producing 0 units, because we know at 0 units the variable cost is going to equal 0. So the fixed cost must be $14. So what we see here is that the firm can produce and lose, if the price is $10, the firm can produce and lose $14. Or the firm can shut down and lose their fixed cost of $14. Remember, they've already agreed to pay this fixed cost. It's like the rent on their building or the interest they're paying on the rental of their capital equipment, something that they've got to pay whether they produce anything or not. So they're just as well off producing 3 units and losing $14 compared to if they're shutting down and losing $14. That's why it's the shutdown point, and that's why we'd say they're indifferent between producing and not producing at that price. Let's look at what happens if we're kind of in between, if we're losing money but we're losing less than our fixed costs. So I've reproduced those slides again below here and changed the price to $12. If the price is $12, I filled in all the information on this table, and based on what we did in the previous lesson, you should be able to look at this and identify what's their profit maximizing point. We're looking for the MR equals MC, or the last quantity where MR is greater than MC. And we go through it, so we're comparing 12 and 6, 12 and 8, 12 and 12. So we're going to stop there. That's the MR equals MC point, 12 and 12. So the firm should produce, if the price is $12, 4 units. And their outcome here is that they're going to lose $8 when they produce 4 units. But remember, their fixed cost is $14, so their choice is do we continue to produce and lose $8, or do we shut down and lose $14? And the rational thing for the firm to do is to continue to produce. The other thing we could say is that if we're losing less than our fixed cost, then we're covering some of our fixed costs. I think that's a helpful way to think about this. We're covering some of the fixed costs by producing. Even though we're losing money, we're covering some of our fixed costs, and we're better off in the short run continuing to produce than we would be shutting down, where we're going to end up losing more money. So again, that shutdown point, the point at which that kind of turns, is the minimum average variable cost. And you can always identify that from a table by just taking that average variable cost list and finding the smallest one and saying that's going to be the shutdown price. If the price is greater than that $10 minimum average variable cost, this firm is going to continue to produce even if it's losing money. Okay, next we can take this firm's information that we have. This again is the graph of the same information we used in the last lesson, and generate a firm, and even if we're given some more information about the industry, an industry supply curve. The supply curve comes from this information. So think about it this way. A supply curve is a relationship between the market price and the quantity supplied. So we're going to look at different prices, what's the firm's quantity supplied. We've already said if the price is $10, then the firm will supply 3 units. You can see that either from this graph or from the data tables that we used in the previous lesson. If the price is $12, then the firm will supply somewhere between 3 and 4 units. Let's go with the whole numbers. If the price is $14, the firm will supply 4 units. And let's take the price up to $18. If the price is $18, the firm will supply 5 units. If we look back at, again, the information that we went over in the previous lesson, that's what we found for each of these different prices. $14, supply 4 units, $18, 5 units, and $10, 3 units. So this is a supply curve. This is the firm's supply curve, because a supply curve is just a relationship between at different prices, what is the quantity the firm is going to supply. And notice what this also is. This is also, let's say, and a graph of the firm's marginal cost curve. Because essentially what we're doing is taking, for each of these prices, there's a marginal revenue curve, and where the marginal cost and marginal revenue intersect, that's the profit maximizing output at 10, at 14, at 18. So the marginal cost curve is the firm's supply curve. It's the same as the firm's supply curve, and that's what the second bullet points out here. The marginal cost curve above the shutdown point, the minimum average variable cost, is the firm's supply curve. Now, if we were going to try to figure out what's the industry supply, all we have to know is how many firms are in this industry. Because in perfect competition, we're assuming a lot of things about the way that firms operate, one of which is that they all have similar cost structures, all face similar kind of decisions. That's kind of a stretch for real life, but if that's the case, say that there are 100 firms in this industry. Then we know that if the price of the good is $10, the market price is $10, then the market is going to supply 300 units. Just multiply the firm's quantity supplied by the number of firms, 100. 400 units at $14 and 500 units at $18. So if the assumptions of perfect competition hold, this is where the industry's supply curve comes from. It comes from the firm's marginal cost of production. And ultimately, the reason why an industry supply curve is upward sloping like that is because in the short run, firms' costs are upward sloping because of diminishing marginal productivity. So now we start to see kind of the importance of this diminishing marginal productivity concept to the whole kind of foundation of why firms act the way that they do in the market, why they increase their production when the price of the good increases. Okay, we're going to do a number of problems with this in class. I'm going to stop this here because the concepts are out there, and we'll do a lot to work with this. See you in class.